Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have three tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And for today's episode, with 2023 wrapping up, we are going to be talking about what we learned, some of the key takeaways that each of us had from this past year. And these are kind of a mix of both the things that we picked up in our work, but also things outside of our work. Things in our lives, or things that we picked up from different things that we read, or people we interacted with, or conversations that we had, or different exercises that we're using with people. So maybe a little bit of a different episode than some others that we've had in the past, but definitely excited to dive into this topic.
Yeah, I think it's always good to reflect back on your year, whether that's how you performed, but also, what did you learn from this year, and how can you build on that going into the next year? So I think today we're going to talk about some of the things that we personally learned, but also some things that we've been working on with our clients more so this year, maybe some of their more common challenges this year, or techniques that have been specifically helpful throughout the year. And of course, a lot of the things that we read and we talk about, inform the interventions and conversations that we have with our clients. So, Josh, you want to get us started off with your first item that came to mind with lessons of 2023?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the big things, and this wasn't brand new for me, certainly, but definitely something that I found myself using a lot more this year, and I've really, I would say, tinkered a little bit with my approach to this particular tool, is just really diving a little bit deeper into mental rehearsal and visualization. And I have just, as I started reflecting on this year and maybe some of the takeaways, that was definitely one of the things that came to mind, that I just really seeing that by utilizing visualization and mental rehearsal a little bit more with athletes, that they feel that they have a tool that they can utilize, whether it's something that they utilize on the court, whether it's something that they utilize before they perform as sort of a way to essentially practice what they're going to do and how they want to respond to different situations, or practice their form, or again, this can be used in different ways. But I have found that a lot of, as I have tried to utilize it more in this year, I've found that a lot of athletes have really latched onto it and have really enjoyed using it, and have found benefit in using that particular skill.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. I had one client who is a pickleball player, former tennis player. And one of the things that she noticed was, because she really gravitated toward visualization, and she noticed that when she lost a little bit of the discipline with it, it had an on-court impact. So it immediately reminded her that she needed to continue her discipline with her, her weekly visualization exercises. And it's interesting, Josh, I'm sure you see this, that even though this is a skill that is not necessarily that difficult to do and to engage with, like a lot of mental training, it takes some discipline to simply sit down and dedicate the time to it. But you see, I think, different athletes gravitate to it more than others. And it tends to be the ones who are really serious about what they want to do, who will do it and then get a lot out of that, as you know, with the rehearsal piece. And so I had several athletes that I worked with, not just tennis players, who really took that on this year and had a lot of success. And as you said, you know, it helps to build confidence. It can help with you know, your form, your technique, etc. So certainly that's something we encourage everybody to engage with, even if it's just more imagination and visualizing some highlights.
Absolutely. And as we've talked about, in our episodes, and I know we've I think we each did a master class on, on different visualization techniques. There are, different methods to doing it. One, I would say the method that I utilize most is the scripting method, sort of talking about, sort of starting by talking about some of the different benefits and sort of how to do it, and then finding, helping an athlete come up with a script, right, where they're able to, essentially tell a story, and maybe it's about a paragraph long, and write out that story using, as many details as possible, using senses, using emotions, really trying to add in things that when they read it back, or ideally listen to it back, because after you write it out, you can record it, that it's something that you can, really use as a resource. And since you have some of those details, it helps it feel a little bit more vivid, a little bit more realistic, and can hopefully put you in that moment a little bit more, right? Thinking about maybe the breeze, the feeling of the breeze, or feeling of the feeling of the grip in your hand, or the smell of the freshly cut grass nearby, or whatever some of those vivid senses or some of the emotions that you expect to experience are. But the more you can include some of those, it tends to put you in the moment a little bit more. So yeah, and again, I would encourage. I know we've talked about this topic before in the past, in past episodes. So people can absolutely check that out, or also reach out to us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com with questions about this particular topic. I also find that it's one of those topics, maybe like meditation, maybe like a couple other topics, where the term gets thrown around, right? Maybe by coaches, maybe by parents. They say, oh, like, visualize yourself being successful. And sometimes people will hear that, but I think what's really important is how we do it. And as we were saying, there's different ways to do that. You can visualize form, you can visualize different responses, you can visualize a whole host of different things. But I think, just having some guidance about how you do that can be really helpful.
Yeah, and just a reminder, you know, we like you said, Josh, we both did a master class on that, and you know, if you're interested in seeing these master classes, you can go to our Patreon page and look up the information about how you can get access to that. So, you know, patreon.com/tennis IQ podcast. So that's, yeah, I think visualization is a great thing to do. And certainly a good maybe reminder in your own work and both of our work that this is something we should work on with players. I think the first big lesson slash reminder for me this year was also something you covered in a different masterclass. You played a video of Rafael Nadal describing essentially how to do mental training. And he starts off the video by saying, you work mentally when you don't complain. When you don't complain about playing poorly, you don't complain about maybe aches and pains that you're feeling. And instead, you know, you basically put a good face on it, have a good attitude, use good body language, and then you just practice with passion because these things are normal. And so, not that that's not new, but what's happening there is really kind of interesting. And it also tuned me into a book that I finished this past year, which was Mindset by Jackie Reardon and Hans Dekkers, who make a good distinction between problem and story thinking and solution and action thinking. And what is Rafa saying when he's saying don't complain? He's saying basically stop making up this story about what's wrong. It is what it is. You have to learn to accept it. And whatever is going on with you is probably pretty normal. It's normal we won't play well in practice sometimes. It's normal we have aches and pains as tennis players. So accept it and now move on to what you actually want to do. And for him, Rafa, I think we've talked about personas at times. He has a persona of maybe this sort of raging bull type champion guy. And so he does what that person would do. He just simply has great body language and he goes out there and practices with passion. So he's able to accept what happened and then move on. So I think that's a really good basic way to start to choose to see how I can overcome these little challenges. We all complain about stuff. Can we learn to notice we're complaining and then shift to, all right, what do I actually want to do about it? Because this complaining stuff is not going to give me a good training session today, or it's not going to give me a good match. So how can I put my best foot forward? How can I be that player that I really want to be? What would that player do? And then commit to that. So it's very much sort of like an acceptance of what's going on and then committing to what you want to do. That could be sort of mindfulness acceptance. It could be sort of an acceptance commitment piece. But it's that noticing, hey, yeah, I'm complaining. I don't like what's going on. Can I shift away from that story into action, into something I want to do? And so I think it's what is that video, Josh? Maybe 50 seconds. It's not long at all, but it's like one of the greatest training videos you could show someone, even though it's so basic.
Absolutely. And I think it actually ties into an important idea that we've talked about a lot in past episodes. This idea of trying to view different types of situations as a challenge or as an opportunity rather than a threat. And I think if I were to guess, I think Rafa developed this attitude from a young age, and I know Tony Nadal, his uncle and longtime coach, used an interesting method where they would practice with dead balls. They would practice on courts with cracks in them. They would practice in conditions that were less than ideal, really with the idea of helping him build mental toughness and also with the idea of trying to, so that he wouldn't complain in these types of situations, right? So that if he's playing in a match and the balls get dead, it's that's okay. He's practiced with that before, that's not a reason to complain or not an excuse if he loses. Or if the court has a crack in it or there's a weird bounce, okay, that doesn't need to be an excuse either, right? And I think it's the same type of thing where when things aren't going well in practice and matches, that's you can view that as a threat to yourself or to your ego, or I think I'm this caliber of player, but today I'm not showing that level. That doesn't feel right. It's very easy um to get upset by that, or to have that feel like maybe a threat to you, or to maybe the way that you see yourself. But I think that there is an opportunity there. There is the opportunity to work on your mental game, to work on how you're going to respond to situations where you're not playing your best, to situations where things aren't ideal. And the more that you can respond, the better you can respond to those situations, the better you'll respond to those situations in the future. So it really is just practice, and I think also, that it's that idea of sort of everything being practice, which I know is something we've talked about with Christina Rollo and Dave DeHaan, and in our past episode with them. Every day at practice, every day during a match is ultimately is practice for the future. And those days where things aren't going so well, when you choose to, as Rafa said, to handle it in the right way, to not complain, to try to find a way, to try to have a good attitude despite all that, you're training. You're training during those moments, right? It might be frustrating still the way that you're playing, but if you can decide to look at it in a different way, you can really get a lot out of that experience.
Yeah, and Tony Nadal tells a story in a TED Talk he did some years ago where it was before Rafa was going to play Federer for one of the first times, and Rafa asked him, how do you see today's match? And Tony's, well, his forehand is better than yours. His backhand is better than yours. The volley isn't even close. And forget about the serve. And, Rafa's not feeling too confident at that point. But he said, well, wait a second. When you go out onto the court, knowing all these things, the idea is to look for solutions. And that's what you bring, is understanding what the matchup is, and you look for solutions. And everything you just described, Josh, was about finding a way, figuring out a solution. And that's, I think, and that's what Tony talks about. His philosophy has always been, when you go out on the court, to find solutions. Accept what things are, but find ways to make it happen. So I think, yes, Rafa did learn that from a very early age. I mean, he won. I think the first time he played Federer was in Miami when he was pretty young, and he won 3-3 in a surprise match, and has obviously had a good career against Federer since that time. All right, what is your second big lesson from the year, Josh?
So my next one is that every conversation, every interaction, really is an opportunity to learn, and in a certain way that kind of fits in a little bit to what you were saying about about Rafa's approach, but trying to really remind myself that every time I interact with somebody, whether that's a client, whether that's you, Brian, with our podcast episodes, or some of the other things we've done, whether that's somebody that I interact with on the tennis court or elsewhere, just trying to remind myself that each of these interactions really are an opportunity to learn. You have some, I think if you can approach situations that, in the way that you have something to learn from everybody and you have something to learn from every interaction, then you're open to what they have to say, right? You're coachable, you're you're open to learning, to changing, to maybe seeing things in a slightly different way, rather than going at things with maybe more of a fixed approach, as if we know it, as if we know everything, as if we don't have more things to learn. So I think just sort of that shift in thinking has been really powerful for me, because I think I've you know and I guess obviously I'm not perfect in this, but try to do a better job of being present. Try to do a better job of really trying to listen rather than sort of waiting for my chance to speak, which I think can happen at times, and I've certainly been guilty of that myself. But really trying to take in what the person that I'm interacting with is saying, and I have found that really can makes a huge difference, just in terms of what I can learn or take away from a particular conversation or interaction.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think I'm hearing a little bit of beginner mindset in there too. Many of us in the world look at ourselves as experts, and yeah, then when we do that, we tend to turn off maybe what we're hearing. And I think we all hopefully go through a transition where we might have thought of ourselves as an expert, but then we come to a realization that the more you know, the more you understand you don't know. And in tennis, there's a great example of this where I live. I live in Newton, Massachusetts, and the former men's tennis coach from Harvard, Dave Fish, lives in the same town. And Dave's a great mentor to many people. He's a great role model as a coach. He was coach at Harvard for many, many years. Great teams. Played there before that. And I like to watch Dave interact with other people. I tend to be the kind of quiet, reserved one who observes things. And Dave isn't the one out there just giving unsolicited advice. No matter what your level is and who you are, he's asking questions, he's looking you in the eye, and he's really engaged in what you're saying. Because you can tell that he believes exactly what you just said, that you can learn from anyone about, different points of view, etc. And we're all unique individuals. We all have unique experiences. Those experiences are certainly valid to who you are. And I think, in our position, Josh, we're kind of like, unique collectors of different experiences. And it just gives us more breadth and depth into what we can do for players because we can understand different situations. It's nothing is like, oh yeah, that's normal. Here's the formula for that. It's more like when we're open to that kind of listening, we can help co-create solutions with players because they know a bit about themselves more than we do, but they don't always know as much about themselves as they think they do. And that's where I think that collaboration comes in. But I think that's a really good point about just being open to what you're hearing and being a great student of life.
Yeah, and I think when that is your, when you're trying to turn on that sort of a perspective, yeah, you become open to learning from everybody. You have that sort of beginner's mind approach where yeah, where you're rather than that, okay, I'm the expert, okay, experts sort of, I know a lot so much about this topic that there's not more for me to learn. I think that's more of that fixed mindset approach rather than, being able to be open to growing and open to learning and maybe being proven incorrectly or having certain preconceived notions that, changed over time. So I think it's just a completely different way to see things. And I have found, again, I'm definitely not perfect at it, but definitely something that I'm trying to get better at, and something that I learned along this year, in terms of the importance of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, what is your next takeaway or next thing that you learned from 2023?
I think the next one is sort of an evolution of the idea of control the controllables. Again, we did a master class on this particular topic, but we're going to call it the inside out approach. So, sports psychologist Charlie Unwin, who's from the UK, wrote a book called Inside Out. And it's a great discussion of how focus, confidence, those two things are very linked. But the inside out approach is really about understanding what you can control and how it relates to the things that are not fully in your control. So we did an exercise where we listed everything we could control in a tennis performance, and we put that stuff inside a circle. And so we came up with attitude, effort, footwork, etc. Lots of different things. And all of that was like fully within your control. And then we started to talk about some things that were not fully within your control. Some of them maybe you had influence over, some of them you didn't. So things like winning, UTR, ranking, your opponent, bad calls, etc. Weather, all that would go sort of outside the circle. And so when you think about an inside out approach is if you stay inside the circle, really focus very well on those things you can control, it gives you a much better chance of achieving positive outcomes that are not fully within your control, right? So looking at the inside of the circle and radiating outwards. And so that approach really resonated with a lot of athletes this year. I've done that presentation for tennis players, equestrian athletes, soccer players, etc. And it just gives a slightly more evolved way of talking about control the controllables, because it also it connects the controllables to outcomes that you would like to achieve. It sort of strengthens that relationship that, yeah, of course I want to win. But now I get that wanting to win comes through me focusing on these things that I can control. And if I do that, I have a better chance. And that's all you can really do in tennis, in a combat sport like this, where you have a direct opponent, is do everything you can to give yourself a better chance. There are no guarantees of that. There's almost never 100% guarantee that you're going to win a match. Sure, there are some situations where that's the case, but that's not the norm. So to me, I really liked talking to players about this idea of being, going inside out, being inside the circle, using the circle as a metaphor for doing this approach. And I know we had a class about that, And I think, when we did that class, Josh, I think you liked that approach. I think that was something that resonated with you as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, it's that this concept of controlling the controllables is definitely something we've talked about a lot. It's something I definitely talk about with clients that I work with. Tends to be, the first thing or one of the first things that I bring up actually in terms of concepts. So yeah, I really liked how rather than just separating what's in our control and what's not. Um, Being able to, as you said, being able to link what's in our control with some of these things that are outside of our control, like our UTR, like winning this match, like what other people might think of me, like, what decisions my coach might make, things like that, that are ultimately out of our control, but that we can impact and influence through those things within our control, like our effort, our attitude, our decision making, our preparation, self talk, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely like that approach, and and I think it's yeah, I think I appreciate the way that you sort of outline that because I think that it's something that people can think about and yeah, just it really is a fundamental. It stems from that fundamental question that of is this in my control or not, which Stoic thinkers and philosophers, including Marcus Aurelius, were talking about, a couple thousand years ago, and and I think that that sort of basic fundamental question is a simple question, but it's also profound. And I think probably everybody has had situations where they've focused too much on things completely outside of their control, things that they can't do anything about. And if we're wrapped up in focusing on those sorts of things, then what we're not focusing on is, what we can do about it. What is controllable in this situation. And I think it's important to be able to determine what are certain things that we do always have full control over, and as regardless of the circumstances, whether this is tennis or life, there always are those controllable factors that we can choose to focus on and put our attention towards.
Yeah, and I think that also relates back to, shifting away from complaining, right? Probably complaining about stuff that is not fully within your control. And then what do you do about it? You bring it back to something you can control and choose to be excellent at those things that you can control. That will give you a better chance of having a good day. All right, what is your next lesson from 2023?
All right. So this one is definitely tennis specific, and it I would say it has to do with one of the unique qualities of tennis. And really that is that you can't run out the clock. You can't run out the clock in tennis. It's never over until it really is officially over. And I think, and I know, Brian, this is something you've talked about a lot. And I think it's something that over this past 12 months or so that I've started to really think about and, talking about with clients that I work with. And, I think if we think about a sport like basketball, right? If a team is up by 30 points and there's 5 seconds to go, the game is, for all intents and purposes, over, right? And American football, that's the same, or soccer, any sport really where there's a clock, it is possible and strategically important at the end of game to simply just run out the clock and let the time tick down, and then it's over. Tennis, and there's other sports that we can add to this category as well, but tennis is different from those sports that I previously mentioned in that there is no clock. So the match could be 6-0, 6-love, 5-love, 40-love. If the player who is down in the score starts winning points, points, and their opponent starts losing points, especially some of these critical ones towards the beginning, obviously, the match will turn around and the player who's down will come back and win. And that's really what it's about. And I think it's an important, and that might seem very basic as well, but I think it really is an important concept because it's so easy for people to fall into this trap of thinking that matches are over. Okay, it's I'm down a set or down a set in a break. You know what? this is over. Maybe it's time to look for an excuse. Maybe I should, think about what I should have done differently. But I think there really is a different approach that, okay, matches turn around all the time. We see it at the professional level. A great example is on the at the Davis Cup finals. For anyone that watched, I think it was the semifinals this year between Italy and Serbia. Yannick Sinner was facing Novak Djokovic and came back from being down 3 match points in the third set and won. And again, that this is against an all-time great, maybe the greatest of all time, Djokovic, and was able to fight back against 3 consecutive match points. And we can probably think back to countless other professional matches, and I'm sure each person who's listening can think back to matches in their own lives where either they've come back or their opponent has come back against them, and it's very common. And I think the reason why, well, I think there's different reasons why, but I think this concept that you can't run out the clock and it never being over is a big part of it. We've also talked on this podcast about some of the different dynamics that can come into play when one player is trying to close out a set or a match and the other player is trying to come back, right? Where the other player who's trying to come back often has nothing to lose and is maybe playing a little bit more free or loose at that point, and the player who's trying to close out the set or match often is feeling a lot of pressure, can tighten up, and it can be very easy for those dynamics to shift and for that comeback to take place. So that was one of my takeaways from the year, and definitely sort of a theme that I saw kept coming up time and time again. What are some of your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, same here. That was a common theme this year of players. Whether we called it finishing, for some it was really more or less just holding the lead and dealing with that self-induced pressure of the score and how not to let that get in their heads so much. But same conversation sort of prefaced all of that, was like, all right, this is one of the major challenges of the sport of tennis. It requires you to finish, so we have to start to think about this situation differently, because at present, however you're thinking about it is creating the wrong emotions for you to succeed there. You mentioned challenge mindset earlier. Challenge mindset is a great way to look at this. Instead of protecting your lead, can we think about maybe building your lead mindset? So it's a good opportunity to play around with different ways of thinking about this necessary experience that we all have to go through to become great tennis competitors, so that you can start generating the right kind of emotions that you want to have. Because quite frankly, you're in a better position than your opponent if you are trying to finish the match. You're the one who's probably ahead. I'd rather be you than the other person, even though you might want to switch places. The thing is, you're in a position to win. Your opponent is really in a position just to survive at that particular moment. Obviously, things can change. So how we think about these situations really matters. And like you said, Josh, this is a particular challenge in a sport like tennis, other racket sports as well, where there's no clock. Your probability of winning and losing is never 100 or 0 until it's actually over. And like you said, yeah, the Sinner comeback against Djokovic in the Davis Cup was great. I mean, right there, like sort of right in this moment in time, two of the best players in the world, maybe the two best players in the world, form-wise, going at it in such an important match. And so it was so cool to see the fact that both of them really gave a lot of effort for Davis Cup. And, we've all had those experiences of coming back. We've probably also had the experiences of losing leads as well. So we've been on both sides of the equation, and it's a good opportunity to look at those experiences and learn from those, to understand, all right, what do I think I need to do in order to finish better? Because if you're struggling with this, your current approach is probably not working. So how do we change it? Because avoiding the situation is not really possible. So that's not something we can do unless you just decide to avoid competition altogether. And that also is not a recommended approach if you want to become a great tennis player or a great competitor. So yeah, definitely that was a challenge that popped up a lot for me as well this year.
Gotcha. And I think it's one of those things that will continue to pop up, right? We will, whether at the professional level, whether it has to do with our own games, or people around us. I think it is something we'll continue to see. As we're saying, everyone has been through it. Probably on one side, most people have probably experienced coming back and also having someone else come back against them. And it's a dynamic that will continue to happen. And I think it's trying to just understand, I think when we think about sort of that interplay between one player maybe tightening up, starting to think more about the result, and the other player often maybe letting go a little bit, playing freely. Maybe there's something to be learned from those moments, something to be learned where from that looseness, something to be learned from sort of that way that the player who's down can sort of let go and maybe stop focusing so much on the result. And maybe the player who's ahead can try to maybe adopt some of that. I know Brad Gilbert has talked about sort of lying to yourself with the score, and if you're trying to serve out a match, almost telling yourself that you're actually, okay, instead of me serving at 5-4, no, it's actually 4-5. Almost like lying to yourself or telling yourself that, so that you can kind of trick yourself into thinking that that you need to hold on to this game and sort of to keep the intensity in that way, rather than thinking about closing out a match, which can you know cause people to often overthink and to think about what could go wrong, or maybe jump towards the future and think about, okay, if I win this match, this is how it's going to impact my rating or my ranking or whatever it may be. So there's definitely different approaches there.
For sure. Yeah. So I think one that's related, and this is really my third lesson or big challenge from the year. Notice with my clients is helping players improve their self image as a competitor. And that comes in two flavors. Many people talk to themselves negatively about their abilities to compete, who they are. Maybe they limit themselves through that same self talk about whether they can win or not, they can do it, etc. And then there are some players who have maybe too neutral of a self image. They don't really think about who they are, who they want to be enough. And then that ends up not kind of restricting them from achieving even greater things that they could. And so a big effort that I worked on this year was helping players see themselves as who they really wanted to be in the future. Now, we could say, for example, I could work with you, Josh, and say, all right, you're going to work on yourself as a champion. And you could come back and say, well, I haven't won anything. But that's fine. A champion isn't about achievements per se. A champion is really a state of being, a way of acting. And anybody can do that. Anybody can bring that kind of presence to the court, work on the discipline of what it means to be a champion, to train and practice like a champion, to, again, have the discipline of what a champion would do. And in fact, I would say those types of things are prerequisites to actually becoming a champion who wins and achieves various titles and so forth. And so that was a big part of the work. And I used a few different techniques with that. One was a self-image exercise that comes from the book With Winning in Mind by Lanny Basham. And then another one, kind of a mixture of story writing or news story, comes from either Jim Lair or Bob Litwin, both well-known in the tennis realms. And so using either one of those, helping players understand who they really wanted to be and what they would do to get there. A lot of that involves repetitive reading of the self-image and thinking about it each day, and then going out and being that person each day. And for those who who took on this work and did the repetitive reading for a month or two, really got a lot of benefit from that. Reprogramming how we think about ourselves. I mean, it sounds like it should be easy. Thinking, it's easy, right? It's easy to think, but we don't realize that thinking patterns are also like skill patterns in the brain. They are, habitual. There's, if we think about the neural pathways, there's some, depth and breadth to those neural pathways. If you think a particular way, you're going to think like that more often. And so how do we, start to untangle that? We have to do more repetitive engagement with how we want to be. And repetitive reading is one way of doing that. So that was, I think, some rewarding work to do this year with players, to really see them change how they thought of themselves and open themselves up to possibilities, and many of them realizing those possibilities simply by understanding that they could be more.
I think that that makes a lot of sense, and I think that deeper work of of self-image, of why, of some of these deeper questions, I think is really important. And I know we've had some episodes, I think in maybe in the last couple of months, where we've talked about some related topics. But I think that's really important work, and no, I agree that players can definitely benefit a lot by really working on that self image and really understanding, more about really who they are, what are some of their character strengths, what are some of the, um, how do they see themselves as people, as tennis players, and I think that really is, something that people can really benefit from.
For sure. So, these things are in many different, books that you can read. This idea of, needing to see yourself in a certain way to, so that you don't limit what you can achieve. There are different philosophies on whether, dreaming big or dreaming small or whatever that is. You got to know yourself on that. But if you're speaking to yourself in a negative way when it comes to your tennis and how you compete and whether you can win or lose, a lot of that ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so why not create that self-fulfilling prophecy more on the positive and possibility side, more on the optimistic side? You'll learn much more from that, and you'll end up in a much better place than simply limiting yourself and not trying at all. So I think this is really important work for people to understand, and that it does take work. It's not as easy as just switching how I think. There are definitely some exercises to go through. So Jim Lair's The Power of Story, Bob Litwin, his book is called Live the Best Story of Your Life. And then With Winning in Mind, Lanny Basham is a good one. Also, right now, reading Josh, Bob Rotella's Make Your Next Shot Your Best Shot. And, really the first chapter is on this topic of seeing yourself in a particular way so that you can achieve certain things in life.
Absolutely, and yeah, I think for any of our listeners who are also golfers or also who maybe follow professional golf, yeah, Bob Rotella definitely has a lot of great books, great content out there. So absolutely. Um, I have one final takeaway or
Great.
sort of thing that I learned over the past year, and this is a little bit different. This is more in my personal life, more in, sort of, I think it connects to tennis, but not necessarily specific to tennis. So I turned 30 this year, which is a milestone. And I think, it probably more than anything, it's kind of the realization that, you're that I'm not a kid anymore, not in college anymore, not and I think kind of in your 20s it can maybe feel like almost like an in-between period between sort of that, childhood, adolescence time, college time to sort of that I don't want to say the real world because I think it's all the real world, but to to adulthood. And I think at 30, and maybe it's because people around me or people that I interacted with were sort of asking me about it, but I think it caused some reflection. I think probably more than anything, it's, as I'm, at this stage in my life, trying to invest a little bit more in myself, trying to invest more in my health, trying to just think more about, what are the things that I need to do to be the best version of myself. And I know that that's something we talk about, and I know it can be seen in a sort of a cliche way, but it really isn't. It's like, can I do the types of things, that will essentially pay dividends over time, right? Like one thing that I've started recently over these past couple of months is to start seeing a personal trainer. And I've always heard of, sort of the benefits of that. And, there's obviously the financial piece or the investment piece, but it really has been one of the things that I have found that has, taken my health and my well-being, and also just, from a mental standpoint, just feeling more focused, more present, more just able to fully engage with what I'm doing because I'm taking some of those additional steps on the health standpoint, on the physical standpoint, and it doesn't always take a milestone birthday to make change in that way. It can, or it can be other life events that cause that. But I think, yeah, just trying to not take things for granted, trying to really, sort of understand the compounding nature of things like health and fitness and well-being, and trying to really invest in those, both from a financial standpoint, time standpoint, energy standpoint, and yeah, just really understanding the importance of it, and really trying to commit to those aspects of things.
It's funny that you bring that up because I had a very similar experience when I turned 30. Certainly I have, different challenges than other people. So like one of the things I really admire about you, Josh, is like your willingness to go travel, all the time, right? You really are very good at taking on new experiences. And I realized like when I turned 30 that I wasn't so good at that. I was more like kind of coasting or afraid of living. And I think for me, it was that sort of stoic existential moment of like, you're not going to live forever. You can't keep postponing things. You have to start living now. And I think that that's, even though that may sound morbid on the outside, it's actually a much better way of living because you tend to appreciate the time that you are in, being present, like you were just saying. And so, yeah, does it always have to be a milestone? No, it doesn't. I think maybe for men, it tends to be milestones that do that. I don't know. But I had a very similar experience, but it really changed things for the better for me as well to do that. It also made me reflect on what I wanted from tennis from age 30 on. And my tennis career from age 30 has been great, much better than the previous 20, 30 years. So I think it's really kind of cool that you had that moment and that you're taking steps to recognize this and make some improvements and so forth. And it's only, so for me, turning 30 was 25 years ago. What I can say to you is that I think you're going to start even enjoying your life better as you go through your 30s and 40s. You just become wiser and more mature and take things in so much better. And I think, just knowing you and what kind of perspective you have, I would expect as you address things like personal training and you're playing more tennis, just that the quality of your life will just continue to get better and better.
Well, no, I appreciate that, and yeah, definitely. I think the tennis piece as well. I recently, I live out here in Boulder, Colorado, and this time of year, yes, it does tend to be sunny here, so we do have certain days where you can play in December and January outdoors. But indoor tennis is obviously helpful, and I recently joined a nearby club and have been trying to, play quite a bit, whether that's playing with other people, whether that's playing some matches, whether that's doing some clinics, even playing with the ball machine, working on my strokes, and just trying to get out there and play more. I had been coaching up until about 2 years ago, up until October of 2021, as I was, sort of building my clientele and growing my practice. But since I took my practice full time, about 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years ago, I haven't played tennis as consistently. And, sometimes I'll get out there on the court and feel a little bit rusty, which is frustrating. But yeah, over this past I'd say month or so, maybe past couple of months, just trying to play more often, looking for different opportunities to get out there and play. And yeah, definitely, I would say, Brian, I've been inspired, as you've talked about, sort of that realization at the same age at 30, and wanting to, bring out your best tennis and sort of have this chapter be your best chapter. I know you've talked about it from a mental toughness standpoint, right? So, wanting your mental game at this age to be better, and obviously, you made that change within your own tennis game, and also, went into this field where you can, impact others in a positive way. And their mental games, and definitely, yeah, definitely, I want to bring out my best tennis, and I want to be able to apply, the skills that I work on with people to my own game, and continue to learn and continue to grow. And yeah, I think it's definitely an exciting time again. And it's all, I think it really boils down to that it's all about how you view things, right? There's two ways, or often more than two ways, to view any situation, right? It's be easy to say, okay, I'm 30 now, my best years maybe physically are on the other side, right? You look at some of the pros at, their 20s. But I think it's very easy. I think it's a better approach to say, what, this is a real opportunity in front of me to bring out the best tennis I've ever played, the best my mental game's ever been, to impact people in a positive way, to really lead by example, which is, again, something, Brian, I've really seen that you've done, on the court and in other areas, and definitely something that I strive to do, more and more going forward as well.
Yeah, and hopefully, people listening can learn from that as well. That just sort of take stock where you are, and everybody can get better depending on what it is that you want to work on. And so I think it's a kind of a good lesson to end today's episode on. So thank you, Josh, for sharing, what you have learned in 2023, and I hope everybody has benefited from what our conversation was today. So that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, and you can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community.
Can I jump in?
Oh, yeah, sure.
And we have next Thursday, and I'm sure people will be listening to this at different times. So if people are listening to this, further in the future, it may have been in the past, but we will certainly have other events coming up. But next Thursday, which is December 28th, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, where I'm located, we're going to have a special end of the year event, which is both a masterclass, which is sort of an ask me anything, ask us anything type of masterclass, where people can present specific questions for us, and we can answer and interact. And we're also going to be discussing the book Mindset. So hope you can join us. We'll put out some things on social media about that as well. But just wanted to jump in and throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Josh. So hopefully we get to see some of the listeners there. And excuse me, thanks again. And we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.